1971 felt like one long studio all-nighter. Moogs wiring themselves into knots. Mellotrons breathing in corners. Drummers learning to count past 4. The 12 tracks ahead turned that chaos into side-length voyages and punchy single edits alike.
Overhead, the albatross hangs motionless.
Number 1, Tarkus, Emerson, Lake and Palmer.
Sunwise, realize you are.
Clocking in at 21 minutes and spread across 7 linked sections, Tarkus was Keith Emerson's idea of a Sunday jam. He walked into rehearsal with a jagged 5/4 organ pattern, asked Carl Palmer to follow the accents instead of the count, and dared Greg Lake to fit a vocal line on top. Lake balked, then answered with the slow Stones of Years passage that lets listeners breathe before the next keyboard volley. The armadillo tank of the gatefold wasn't a random doodle. Artist William Neal sketched it while Emerson described a creature that eats anything in its path, including time signatures. Side 1 of the album belongs to the Beast, and audiences took the ride. The LP hit number 1 in the UK and broke the US top 10 without a single in sight. Concert crowds learned to spot the opening Moog fanfare as a warning. The piece could stretch past a half hour if Emerson felt playful, complete with knife-stabbing organ stunts and a drum break that quoted Wipeout in 7/8. 40-plus years on, Prog drummers still post half-speed play-alongs trying to nail Palmer's snare flams in Manticore, and metal bands borrow the riff from Iconoclast whenever they need an instant march. Number 2, Roundabout. Yes. John Anderson scribbled the lyric while the band's van zigzagged around Scottish locks, every bend inspiring another roundabout reference. Back in London, Steve Howe layered bright harmonics on his Gibson ES-175, then doubled the main motif on a Martin acoustic for extra snap. Chris Squire answered with that springy Rickenbacker bass line, and Rick Wakeman iced the intro by spinning a grand piano chord backward onto tape. A studio trick that makes the song appear out of thin air. Atlantic edited the 8.5-minute album cut to 3 minutes 27 seconds for AM playlists. Even Trimmed, it climbed to number 13 in the US and turned Fragile into a million seller within a year. Live, Yes often rebuilt the middle jam on the fly. Wakeman once tossed in a bar of The Entertainer just to see if Howe would chase it. He did. Decades later, the track found a second life as the punchline sting in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure memes, sending a fresh wave of teenagers hunting for the source of that final, sliding E minor chord. Squire's pick attack, Bruford's offhand ghost notes, Howe's octave runs. Players still slow the vinyl to half speed, trying to catch every detail, then realize the band sped most of it back up on stage anyway. Number 3, Echoes, Pink Floyd.
Overhead, the albatross hangs motionless.
The working title was Nothing, parts 1 through 24, a stack of tape scraps Roger Waters labeled while the band hunted for a fresh centerpiece after Adam Heart Mother. David Gilmour stitched 2 segments with a single, pinging B note, fed through a Leslie cabinet. That sonar tone became the glue for a sidelong voyage. Rick Wright's Hammond funneled into a Benson Echo Rec, creating the cavern effect once mistaken for a bowed guitar. Midway, engineers reversed the rotary speaker's power leads, getting the shrill Seagull guitars by accident when Gilmour's wah pedal shorted.
And everything is green as submarine.
The full 23-minute take pushed Metal past 2 million U.S. sales, with zero help from singles, and live version stretched nearer to half an hour. Lighting crews timed dry ice bursts to Nick Mason's heartbeat toms, so the stage looked like a planet forming in real time. Director Michelangelo Antonioni asked to license the track for Zabriskie Point. The band offered an early mix. Antonioni said it wasn't violent enough. So Floyd kept refining until the piece felt like deep ocean tectonics, not desert chaos. In 2018, researchers beaming whale songs through underwater speakers borrowed echoes as their control sample. The only rock track, the Marine Lab's frequency sweep, didn't distort.
Just passing in the street by chance, two separate glances.
Number 4, the Music Box, Genesis.
I'm lost within this hard world.
Peter Gabriel found the seed of the story in a Victorian children's book, where a beheaded boy returns as a ghost. He and Tony Banks turned it into a 9-minute chamber piece that swerves from pastoral 12-string twinkles to organ thunderclaps. Steve Hackett introduced tapping on his Les Paul for the arpeggiated solo 2 years before Eddie Van Halen popularized the trick. Hackett admits he hit on the technique after catching a finger on a high fret during rehearsal and liking the accidental harmonic. In concert, Gabriel donned an old lady dress and fox head, holding a tiny music box that creaked open right before the Mellotron crash. Lighting techs aimed a lone spot, so the porcelain ballerina inside glowed, while the guitars roared. Charisma Records never tried a single, yet word of mouth packed UK theaters, and John Peel called it a short gothic novel set to click track. Later, prog bands filched whole sections. Rush's Xanadu lifts the pastoral intro cadence, and Marillion modeled their first extended suite on the song's Quiet Loud Quiet arc. At Hackett's 2019 anniversary shows, he played the solo on a modern PRS, but triggered the same Hammond drawbar sample Banks used on stage in '71, because some hauntings deserve their original wallpaper. Number 5, Aqualung, Jethro Tull.
Spitting out pieces of his broken luck.
Ian Anderson wrote the opening riff on a battered Martin while thumbing through wife Jenny's street photography proof sheets. One shot of a grizzled vagrant became the title character. Anderson cut the acoustic intro in a single take, then handed the tape to Martin Barr, who plugged a Sunburst Les Paul into a late 60s Marshall and chased the riff until engineer John Burns waved, "Got it." Barr's soaring solo ranks so high on guitarist polls that Gibson once measured the sustain and found it holds nearly 9 seconds before the note dips.
He goes down to the bog and warms his.
Radio programmers argued whether the track was too heavy or too folky, but US FM stations leaned in. By midsummer, Aqualung was moving 20,000 albums a week without a formal single. During the 1972 UK tour, Anderson built a shabby park bench into the stage set, introduced Aqualung by hawking an imaginary lungful of London grime, and flipped to a stool just in time for the quiet, sun-streaking cold verse. Barr still quotes bars of the solo during clinics, reminding players the bend at 3 minutes 16 seconds was a happy accident. He reached for the whammy, forgot the Les Paul didn't have one, and yanked the string instead.
Don't you start away uneasy. You pour out shot.
Number 6, 9 Feet Underground, Caravan.
What I see, I know is real. What I touch, I know I feel.
Caravan stitched this 22-minute Canterbury epic together in a rented church hall, splicing 4 rehearsal jams with David Sinclair's fuzz-heavy Hammond runs as thread. The final version, spread across an entire side of In the Land of Grey and Pink, snakes through key changes so naturally that Sinclair once joked, "The organ knew the chords before we did." Bassist and vocalist Richard Sinclair drops in at the 14-minute mark with lyrics about subterranean daydreams. Lines he scribbled after a marathon session left the band, buried under cables and teacups 9 feet deep.
It all back again.
Decca didn't bother with a single. Instead, they pressed a 4-minute sampler for John Peel, who played the full suite on his late-night BBC slot anyway. Stateside college stations followed, cueing the whole Grandad by the hand section to prove Prog could still swing. When Caravan toured the piece, roadies marked the stage in tape so each member could find the next microphone during the seamless segues. Modern jam bands lift the central love in your eye groove when they want to sound proggy without losing dancers. Sinclair's ring-modulated organ still draws nods from keyboard techs who know how hard it is to keep those vintage pedals from squealing the wrong kind of feedback.
Go straight to you. All my love is you.
Number 7. Man Erg, Vandergraaf Generator. Work on the song fell together in a single week of summer 1971 rehearsals at Trident, London. Peter Hamill opened with soft piano chords under a floor lamp, reading lyrics about an inner killer from a spiral notebook. Hugh Banton answered on a battered Hammond run through homemade overdrive. Every time he leaned on the swell pedal, the decibels clipped, so engineer David Henschel backed the preamp off at mixdown instead of asking for a retake. Sax player David Jackson stood dead center with 2 horns rigged to 1 mouthpiece splitter.
Angels live inside me.
Left reed carried the melody, right reed held the harmony an octave down, an idea he borrowed from Roland Kirk. Halfway through, Guy Evans kicked the beat into 11/8 without warning. Hamill counted the switch by raising his eyebrows, the only cue the band needed. The album Pawned Hearts offered no radio single, yet Italian DJ spun Man Erg uncut. That unexpected airplay pushed the LP to 6 straight weeks at number 1 on the Italian chart in spring 1972, a run that even the group's label hadn't seen coming. Number 8, Hocus Pocus, Focus. Focus walks into London Sound Technique studio in autumn 1971 with one goal: track a hard rock riff so simple even pub crowds could hum it, then wreck the rulebook over the gaps. Guitarist Jan Ackerman laid down the opening in a single blast through his Marshall full stack. Engineer John Wood rolled tape at half speed during the harmonized pull-off so the notes rang longer when played back. Between each riff repeat, Thijs van Leer yodeled straight into an RCA ribbon mic, then swapped to flute, then organ, stacking 4 takes but keeping every first pass. Drummer Pierre van der Linden drove the tempo past 135 beats per minute, complaining only that the click track felt like chasing freight. The Dutch release stretched past 6 minutes on Moving Waves. When Sire picked up U.S. rights in early 1973, executives sliced the middle section, shipped a 3-minute edit, and mailed a note to stations: "Yodel is intentional. Do not fade." WLS Chicago jumped first. The single climbed to number 9 on the Hot 100 by midsummer. During a Top of the Pop slot that July, Van Leer's headset slipped mid-yodel. He caught it on the beat without missing the high G, a moment replayed for weeks on BBC blooper reels. Nike's 2010 World Cup adverts later revived the riff, driving a fresh spike in streaming numbers and reminding newer listeners that the loudest hook of 1971 came wrapped in alpine whoops and a wink. Number 9, Sailor's Tale, King Crimson. Robert Fripp arrived at Command Studios London in January 1971 with an idea built on 2 chords and a ship's bell sample lifted from the BBC sound effects library. Ian Wallace set up his Ludwig kit in the hallway for natural echo. tapping the bell between cymbal hits to keep the C theme running. Mid-take, Mel Collins switched from alto to baritone sax and blew through a ring modulator pedal Peter Sinfield had just soldered together. The wobble turned the horn line into a foghorn groan. Fripp then overdubbed a 3-minute Les Paul Storm, running the guitar through a Maestro FZ1 fuzz and an EMS filter so each note spat rust. The finished track filled nearly half of Islands, released in December 1971. No single followed, yet college FM stations in Boston and San Francisco cued it late at night, letting the 7-minute buildup roll straight into the violin coda. On the 1972 U.S. tour, Fripp stretched the solo, sometimes staring past the 10-minute mark, while John Wetton, new on bass, hung on one pedal tone to keep the ship steady. Bootlegs from Detroit and Frankfurt show set lists with Sailor's Tale circled. Crew notes warned the lighting desk to fade all LEDs to deep blue, because Fripp wanted the room to feel like open water before the final Mellotron swell hit. Number 10, Plain Truth, Gentle Giant. The band pieced this closer together at Advision Studios during spring 1971 downtime, jamming over a riff Ray Schulman lifted from a warm-up scale. Producer Tony Visconti liked the raw take so much he only asked for one punch-in. Kerry Menier doubled the main line on clavinet for extra snap. Ray then plugged his electric violin into a color sound wah, set the pedal halfway open, and recorded the solo in a single go. Hard clipping left on purpose. Derek Schulman dropped in a few lines about finding solid ground, but the track stayed mostly instrumental, riding a 12/8 swing that flipped to straight time for the turnaround. Acquiring the Taste landed in July 1971 without a radio-ready single, so Vertigo mailed 5-minute edits to BBC Radio 1. John Peel played the full 7-minute version instead, praising the wah violin break as a guitar solo in disguise. In the U.S., WMMS Cleveland slotted the tune between Zeppelin deep cuts, helping the album sell just enough to fund a winter Midwest swing. Onstage Giant turned the solo section into a call and response. Gary Green answered Ray's wah licks on a Les Paul, each run a bar longer until the audience lost track of who led. Later Prog outfits, from Kansas to Rush, borrowed that loud, quiet, loud structure. Interviews with their players often name-check Plain Truth as the first time they heard a violin talk back to a stack of Marshalls. Number 11, El Giardino del Mago, Banco del Mutuo Soccorso. The Roman Sextet booked 2 overnight blocks at RCA Italiana's Studio B, wedging a Hammond, a grand piano, and Vittorio Nocenzi's early Moog into a space built for pop quartets. El Giardino del Mago stitched 4 moods together, quiet flute, and 12-string arpeggios, a fuzz-bass gallop, Gregorian-style vocal chants from Francesco di Giacomo, and a closing keyboard duel where the Moog's ribbon controller bent notes far enough to make the tape operator wince. The self-titled LP hit Italian shops in May 1972, but this track had circulated months earlier on late-night RAI underground shows, giving university listeners a taste of symphonic rock sung in their own language. A single edit never happened. Promoters used the full 18-minute piece to open concerts, projecting swirling slide oil visuals on auditorium ceilings while Di Giacomo wandered the aisles in monk robes. By year's end, Banco had sold out Rome's Teatro Brancaccio 3 nights straight, rare territory for any band without a top 40 single. And keyboard shops across Italy started a waiting list for mini Moogs, each buyer citing the Mago solo as the reason. Number 12, The Garden of Earthly Delights, The United States of America, 1971 UK reissue. Columbia's 1968 psych-electronica gamble vanished fast in the States, but a 1971 UK budget repress landed The Garden of Earthly Delights on import racks just as British prog heads were craving new sounds. Composer Joseph Bird had built the original track around ring-modulated violin, calliope keyboards, and Dorothy Moscovitz's cool museum tour vocal describing a Bosch-inspired funfair where fortune smiles and never frowns. No guitars. Bird fed electric harpsichord through a homemade envelope follower instead. Yet the odd meters and tape loops fit perfectly next to Crimson and Soft Machine on BBC DJ John Peel's nighttime show. College art departments adopted the song for light show experiments, projecting Bosch panels while the Ring mod hummed. The reissue pushed UK sales past 20,000. Tiny by pop standards, but enough to earn the group a cult spot on Virgin's mail-order lists, where it sat alongside Tarkus and In the Court of the Crimson King as recommended study for budding synth tinkerers. Number 13, Backstreet Love, Curved Air. A nervous backstage jam in early 1971 turned into the riff that guitarist Daryl Way recorded straight through a fuzzed-out Fender combo, while Sonia Christina wrote the lyric on a set list and nailed the vocal in 2 passes. The band slipped a spare VCS-3 synth under the chorus, a last-minute idea that made the track feel cooler than the usual guitar keys. Warner's UK arm picked the song for a June single, and it surprised everyone by jumping to number 4 on the national chart. Prog attitude packed into 3 minutes that even daytime radio could handle. US stations were slower. A handful of FM outlets finally caught on after Melody Maker ran a glowing review. But by then, Curved Air was touring Europe, stretching the middle break so Way could duel Christina's wordless scat with his fuzz violin. The quick blast of success paid for a new Mellotron and put the group on British Kids TV, where Christina's leather jumpsuits and the song's slippery time shift made plenty of viewers decide Prog could be catchy after all. Number 14, Hallelujah, Can. Recorded in a repurposed Cologne cinema, the 18-minute monster began with drummer Jackie Lieberzeitz locking into a cycling groove he called Motoric. Steady enough to hypnotize, loose enough to breathe. Guitarist Michael Caroli layered short wah stabs, and Hogar Chukai filled the gaps with bass riffs edited on the fly, literally cutting tape and looping sections while the band kept playing. Singer Damo Suzuki wandered the room, ad-libbing phrases in English, Japanese, and whatever syllables felt right. The words rising and vanishing like half-remembered dreams. When Tagomago reached European shops that autumn, most stations blinked at the runtime. Yet late-night DJs from Berlin to Paris cued the track anyway, letting the beat glide under weather reports and phone-in shows. Years later, hip-hop producers mined the drum loop, and LCD Sound System's James Murphy called the locked-in pulse the root password for dance rock. If another 1971 labyrinth deserves a spotlight, call it out, and we'll thread it into the next video. Take care, we'll see you soon.